afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the chat on Sustainable Development Goals. I am Tiloka Yapa, a final year undergraduate to the Faculty of Law, University of Colombo. The 2030 Sustainable Development Goal Agenda was first adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 2015. At the heart of this framework is 17 global goals that provides for a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet. Today's chat on SDGs will be a discussion on these 17 goals, which is a commitment undertaken by countries both locally and internationally to further the well-being and prosperity of the planet and humanity. This webinar today is organized by the final year undergraduates and the Department of Public and International Law of Faculty of Law, University of Colombo, in collaboration with the Center for Environmental Law and Policy, Center for Environmental Initiatives, and the Earthmates organization, which is an inter-university student initiative that envisions a sustainable future. With that, let us now move on to a small video on the Sustainable Development Goals. Before commencing our webinar for the day, I now cordially invite the head of the Department of Public and International Law at the Faculty of Law, University of Colombo, Madam Vasantha Senaviratne, to address the audience.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon all. Dear erudite speakers, colleagues of the Department of Public and International Law, Faculty of Law, and students. I'm honored and privileged to speak a few words at the beginning of today's chat on Sustainable Development Goals, set in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly and are intended to be achieved by the year 2030, which is a collection of 17 interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. This chat is organized by the final year undergraduates and the Department of Public and International Law, where I am the current head of the department. As I understand, in collaboration with the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, or HCHR, Center for Environmental Law and Policy, CELP, Center for Environmental Initiatives, CEI, and the Earthmates organization. I'm very pleased to witness this virtual discussion, given that despite the COVID-19 related difficulties that affected our on-site learning and other extracurricular activities, the final year environmental law students organized this very timely webinar on a contemporary theme. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Public and International Law Department and also for final year environmental law students, I warmly welcome the esteemed panel of experts, Professor Arundhati Lokupitiya, Director, Center for Environmental Initiatives, University of Colombo, Dr. Shyami Puvimanasinghe, who is our former colleague and an alumnus of the Faculty of Law, University of Colombo, currently who is a Human Rights Officer, Right to Development Section, OHCHR, Mr. Benjamin Sketcher, Human Rights Officer, Right to Development Section of OHCHR, Ms. Gaynil Curry, Human Rights Officer, Sustainable Development Section of OHCHR, who committed to make this event a success in spite of the busy schedules as well as the differences of the time zones. I'm greatly thankful to senior lecturer Dr. Kokila Konasinghe, who gave the leadership to organize this event, and the representatives of the Earthmates, as well as the final year students who represent Sinhala, Tamil and English medium and will be making presentations at the session. Thank you very much for this student-led endeavor, and let me congratulate all the speakers, and I wish good luck to all of you. We should continue in this type of activities in the future too. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. We've now come to the first session in our agenda, an introduction to the Sustainable Development Goals by 17 final year undergraduates of the Faculty of Law representing Sinhala, Tamil and English mediums. For that, I would first like to invite Yahani Rajapaksa to start off the session. Over to you, Yahani.
Thank you, Tilaka. So the first SDG goal is to end poverty by the year of 2030. And when it comes to the international perspective of this goal, globally the number of people living in extreme poverty declined to 10% in 2050. And this can be identified as a progressive approach compared to the past. Yet there are more than 700 million people still live in extreme poverty today, struggling to fulfill the basic needs like health, education, access to water, sanitation, and etc. And countries like Burundi, Congo, Niger, Haiti are some examples for the countries that are suffer from extreme poverty. And also, due to this COVID-19 pandemic, there is a risk of economic fallout in the world, and research warned it could increase poverty by 8% of the total human population. So, to support the poorest and most vulnerable, UN issued a framework for the immediate socio-economic response to COVID-19, called for a scale-up of international support and political treatment. And also, the UN COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund aims to specifically support low and middle income countries. Anyway, even though there are some many projects are going on, according to the research done by World Bank, ODI, World Data Lab, world is not on the track to end extreme poverty by 2030. So that leaves us a small concern. And when it comes to Sri Lankan perspective, there seems to be a progressive approach in Sri Lanka as well. Poverty alleviation has been the main motive of Sri Lankan development agenda because the government declared 2017 as the year of poverty alleviation. Proportion of national poverty line has declined from 15.3% in 2006 to 4.1 in 2016. And according to statistics, poverty among women is lower than men, although this is a marginal difference. When considered the situation in geographical context, the people who live in rural areas are mostly affected by the poverty. So there are several programs launched by the government, especially the establishment of Welfare Benefit Board in 2016. Some of the key programs are Samurdhi Elderly Payment, Disability Payment, Kidney Patient Payments. Also, overall 34% of the country's population received benefit from social assistance and insurance program. Free education, free health system support the poor people economically. Throughout the past year, government has allocated funds toward rural infrastructure to develop to contribution of the boosting of income of people. Anyway, due to the pandemic situation, many people lost their day-to-day income in Sri Lanka as well. Some main economic sectors of the countries like tourism, textile, and are heavily affected by the pandemic. And there are some issues in the project carried by the government, such as in targeting the exact people who should be benefited from these programs, inadequate benefits, lack of coordination among programs, leading to high cost and overlap beneficiaries, and internal corruptions are some of those issues. So I think there should be a proper identification of marginalized group, and internal activities should be monitored properly to eradicate corruption. And the government should help the entrepreneurs to develop themselves, and we should focus more on their national products and services other than focusing on international products and services. And also we should build a mechanism to identify the geographical distribution of poverty and focus more on those particular areas. Thank you so much.
The second sustainable development goal is zero hunger. We can identify 4 goals internationally as to end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. This zero hunger barrier creates less productive individuals who are unable to improve their livelihoods. This prevails mainly in Asia and Africa. The zero hunger impacts on economy, health, education, social development, also on equality. So currently in the world, 8.9% of world population suffer from hunger and approximately 840 million go hunger by 2030. According to Sustainable Development Goals Report 2020, it says that the effort of people achieving these goals was already off track by the end of 2019 due to man-made conflicts and climate change, and also due to the economic downturns. In the current context, we cannot disregard the COVID-19 situation. The pandemic has only enhanced the risks of falling short, and it's likely to increase the problems regarding food security and malnutrition. Therefore, this pandemic has made it more difficult for people to achieve these goals by 2030. In Sri Lanka, we can identify nutritional triple burden. The first one is high levels of overweight and obesity. The second one is micronutrient deficiencies. And third one is high rate of wasting among children. So we have to consider what are the main reasons for hunger in Sri Lanka. Therefore, we can identify the stagnant growth of crops. In addition, wasting crops without reaching to hungry people. Also, raising food prices. Changes in import duties and unemployment are the main factors that can be considered as reasons for hunger in Sri Lanka. The Triposha program, increased household income, and improved health infrastructure were considered as progressive steps that were taken by Sri Lankan government towards achieve this goal at BIMSTEC Nation 2020. So therefore, the main focus should be how to address hunger in Sri Lanka. The key way is sustainable agriculture. In addition, we have to do investments in agriculture. We have to create employments in agriculture. Also, encourage training and veterinary services to promote livestock productions and encourage sustainable interventions and end poverty can be identified as main factors to achieve these goals. So, as individuals, what we can do? We can make changes in our own lifestyles at home as well as at work. We can support local farmers. We can support local markets. In addition, we can make sustainable food choices. Climate change is the major emergency that has to come across in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka ranks 6th in Global Climate Risk Index 2020, where droughts, landslides continue to compromise food security and nutrition. In addition, land fragmentation, land degradation, and urbanizations are the other main disturbing factors. Therefore, Sri Lanka should mainly focus on food security, nutrition, and sustainable agriculture. Thank you.
The Sustainable Development Goal that I hope to discuss is the most important goal in the current era of epidemics. That is to say, the third Sustainable Development Goal is to ensure good health and well-being for all at all ages. SDG 3 includes 13 targets and 27 indicators. First of all, I am going to talk about what are the targets we have achieved. Sri Lanka achieved the maternal mortality rate global target under the SDGs. Additionally, the under 5 mortality rate and the neonatal mortality rates are also lower than the relevant SDG targets. Sri Lanka's performance with regard to communicable diseases such as malaria is also noteworthy. For example, in 2016, the World Health Organization certified Sri Lanka as a malaria-free country. A free healthcare system has been in operation in Sri Lanka since 1951. Now I would like to consider the challenges in achieving the SDG 3. The main challenge facing Sri Lanka right now is the COVID-19. Achieving this goal has become a major challenge with the COVID-19 control process. Also, Sri Lanka faces a greater challenge in the terms of the threat posed by non-communicable diseases. With 71% of all annual deaths in government hospitals due to chronic NCDs. Because of increasing illnesses as kidney disease, government should reduce water pollution from hazardous chemicals. Another challenge is the rate of injuries and deaths attributed to road accidents is also on the rise. Consider about communicable diseases such as dengue require close attention because dengue has increased year by year. Furthermore, Sri Lanka's HIV prevalence has been an increase in the reported HIV cases from 95 in 2009 to 285 in 2017. Therefore, it is necessary to pay attention to that. Also, the quality of the country's healthcare sector needs improvement in terms of maintaining health standards with regard to ensuring that no one is left behind. Next, I would like to show how to overcome the challenges. For that, health education should be developed primarily. Moreover, health section can also make more aware of how to improve our own health. It is necessary to focus on develop primary healthcare units. For this solution, we can reduce overcrowding and long waiting lists at secondary and tertiary care institutions. Also, government should take action for discourage alcohol and tobacco. Because of these days, there is an increase in the promotion of unhealthy foods. Health section should be informed about healthy food habits. Thus, it appears Sri Lanka fulfilled some targets of SDG 3, although we have to face lots of challenges in overcoming the remaining targets. UN said that healthy people are the foundation for healthy economies. Hence, Sri Lanka should take action for fulfill this goal as a developing country. Thank you.
Goal 4 is quality education. It looks into ensuring equitable and inclusive quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. 2030, the agenda has 10 targets set out for SDG 4. To summarize it for you, what it states is that by 2030, ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. Now, in the context of Sri Lanka, the literacy rate is at 98.7%, and this is mainly due to free education. Although this does seem to be quite progressive, it's only on the surface level. The quality of education has a lot more to improve. This can be broken down into three major issues. The first is the exam-oriented system that Sri Lanka follows. It gears students more towards getting into a university, and there is a huge knowledge gap on certain aspects such as human rights, gender equality, sustainable lifestyles, etc. And this brings it on to the second issue, which is that it doesn't prepare the children for a career. There's not a lot of practical knowledge and soft skills that are learned at schools. And because of that, even the graduates who do leave these institutions aren't skilled enough to meet the expectations of the labor market. Thirdly, the education system is such that it doesn't look into the students, the different types of learners. So you do get students with disabilities, economical and social disadvantages, etc. And because of this, there are disparities that do arise within regions. Maybe it's because of the lack of facilities, the medium of learning, and especially in the plantation sector, there is a high school dropout rate. Now, what are the steps that Sri Lanka has taken to mitigate this and improve the standard of education? The first and the most notable one is the Nearest School, the Best School national program, which is carried out in order to provide equal opportunities in education for everyone. And secondly, the there are more skills-oriented subjects that have been included into the subject curriculum, especially the introduction of the technology stream into the A-level classes. And this will help address the skill mismatches in the labor market and also improve graduate employability. Another thing, like I mentioned before, is that the plantation sector has a high school dropout rate, but there are foundations such as the Merrill J. Fernando Scholarship Program, which does cater to these education difficulties of the children and aims to give a wholesome education for those in the plantation sector. Finally, the ICT literacy in Sri Lanka is something that is a bit backward, but the government has taken steps to to introduce the Cloud Smart Classroom concept, which is a pilot project that's carried out in the Western Province, and it aims to provide digital-based teaching and learning for the students in Sri Lanka. So that is something that's very relevant in the current context because of the pandemic and online teaching that's going on. While there is more room for improvement, we should be appreciative of the steps taken in Sri Lanka to improve the quality of education, and there will be much more advancements in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindula. Now let's move on to the next Sustainable Development Goal. It's goal number 5, gender equality. Women and girls everywhere must have equal rights and opportunity and be able to live free of violence and discrimination. Gender equality by 2030 requires urgent action to eliminate the many root causes of discrimination that still curtail women's rights in private and public spheres. Ensuring universal access to sexual and reproductive health and affording women equal rights to economic resources such as land and property are vital targets to realizing this goal. Here are some of the legislations and policies which improve gender equality in various ways. They are the Constitution of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka 1978, Penal Code of Sri Lanka, especially Act number 22 of 1995, Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, Women's Charter, Children and Young Persons Ordinance, Vagrancy Ordinance, the National Action Plan for the Protection and Promotion of Human Rights, National Policy on Women, National Policy on Child Protection, National Plan of Action to Address Sexual and Gender-Based Violence, CEDAW, and the Child Rights Convention. Where is Sri Lanka now? According to the World Economic Forum, Sri Lanka ranks 55th in the world when it comes to gender equality gap. Women constitute 52% of the Sri Lanka's population, but female representation in parliament is only 5.3%. In order to develop the participation, the government introduced a quota in 2016, setting aside 25% of the positions in local public institutions for women. The labor force participation of women as of 2017 is 36.6% of the total population. According to UNFPA, 90% of the Sri Lankan women and girls have faced sexual harassments in public buses and trains at least once in their lifetime. Persistent challenges facing women include the difficulties of juggling family responsibilities with paid work, limited access to finances, inadequate parental leave policies, and inadequate skills for the modern labor market. Also, deeply rooted attitudes play an integral part in limiting the potential of a woman. A complex fabric of beliefs, values, attitudes, and prejudices based on traditions and historical experience wind through many levels of Sri Lankan society, such as the virginity test in marriage. So, these are the recommendations. To get the women know about their rights, public awareness programs should be held. Equal wages should be given to women. Also, the workplace security should be confirmed. All the discriminatory laws should be amended and new laws should be implemented in order to promote gender equality. Eradicating power imbalances, empowering women to climb the corporate ladder, redefining the man's role in the family to share household responsibilities in line with the woman's role that has changed over time to become an economic contributor. Then Sri Lanka will be able to strive to achieve the goal, gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. Goal number 6, clean water and sanitation. The Sustainable Development Goals are the UN's blueprint for a more sustainable future for all. When it comes to talk about clean water and sanitation, access to safe, resilient water supplies is essential to economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. With the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, water security was put under the international spotlight. 1 in 9 people lack access to clean drinking water, and over 2.5 million people live without adequate sanitation facilities. The main target of Goal 6 is to achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all by 2030. SDG fund programs apply a multi-sectoral approach to the problem of water and sanitation and include the key dimensions. In Sri Lanka, the SDG fund program is carrying out surveys to gather data on the water and sanitation services available at all 10,000 schools. With this information, the Ministry of Education will ensure that all schools and students have access to clean water and sanitation, which is key to improve educational outcomes and nutrition status of students. Further, the Asian Legal Rescue Center joins the UN Independent Expert on Human Rights. Water and sanitation Ms. Katarina in welcoming the landmark resolution adopted by the General Assembly on 28 July 2010 that recognized water and sanitation as a human right. The ALRC is gravely concerned by increasing reports of serious health problems resulting from unsafe drinking water in Sri Lanka. Out of 25 districts in the country, more than 15 districts are seriously affected at present. Recent increase the number of persons suffering from renal disease is one of the major health problems in Sri Lanka. The response by the government of Sri Lanka concerning the unsafe water and related health problem needs to be urgent and comprehensive. It needs immediately address the problem at its source by effectively regulating, monitoring, and reducing the use of toxic chemicals that enter the water system both through the industrial and agricultural sectors. It also needs to extend its safe drinking water services to cover the entire population. The ALRC agrees the independent expert on human rights, water and sanitation and other relevant special procedures to monitor this situation closely and provide recommendation to the government of Sri Lanka to assist it in resolving this problem before it worsens further. Thank you.
Thank you, Naini. Moving on to Goal 7, it needs to be highlighted that ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all concerns not only the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, but the Paris Agreement on Climate Change as well. As reviewed at 2018 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, World Census indicates 789 million people, almost 1 billion, to be without electricity, a low energy efficiency improvement rate, and renewable energy consumption only at 17% of total energy consumption at the global level. The goal focuses on facilitating greater access to energy services, break from traditional energy sources that negatively impact the world as a whole, and marginalized communities and groups due to the limited nature of such resources, along with introducing alternative means of sustainable energy to keep pace with technological advancements, specifically the promotion of renewable energy. For this purpose, it has been suggested that all stakeholders focus their efforts in closing the electricity gap, accelerating the process of transition towards renewable energy, doubling the financing for the 7th Sustainable Development Goal, enhancing innovation, including research and development, etc. Further, the need to strengthen the link between other goals and Goal 7 has been stressed, one such instance being the initiative to decarbonize the world's energy system as expounded by the Paris Agreement. Sri Lanka and Goal 7. It has been reported that Sri Lanka has over 98% coverage of domestic electricity, out of which 53% is obtained by means of renewable energy. It is also reported that limitations of major hydropower generation, rising demand from transport and other power consumptive sectors have increased the country's dependence
on fossil fuel energy sources that are mainly provided by imports and thermal power generation. Whereas the cost of energy has been a challenge, the government has taken initiative to explore new renewable energy options and regulate the energy sector through various projects such as rural electrification programs conducted by the Central Electricity Board, a state-owned enterprise on power generation and distribution, and new community-based projects, one such titled Suryabha Sangramya, Battle for Solar Energy, initiated by the Ministry of Power and Renewable Energy. In general, with regards to domestic and commercial use of energy, energy-saving technologies such as CFL bulbs and LED lighting has been promoted. Initiative by the Central Electricity Board in building the first large-scale wind farm on the southern coast of the Mannar Island needs to be highlighted, which also inevitably gives rise to other concerns with regards to wildlife conservation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். இன்றைய தினம் இந்த அவையிலே நிலைபெயர்தகு அபிவிருத்தியினுடைய இலக்கு 8 தொடர்பாக என்னுடைய கருத்தாடலினை முன்வைக்க விரும்புகின்றேன். அந்த வகையிலே இந்த டீசன்ட் ஒர்க் மற்றும் எக்கனாமிக்கல் growth தொடர்பாக இலங்கையை மையமாக கொண்டு எனது ஆய்வினை நான் நடாத்த உள்ளேன். அதில் இந்த ஆய்வினை சமூக மற்றும் பொருளாதார சுற்றுச்சூழல் சார்ந்த ஒரு பின்னணியில் எனது ஆய்வு கட்டமைக்கப்பட்டுள்ளது. அந்த வகையில் இலங்கையினுடைய பொருளாதாரம் தொடர்பில் என்னுடைய சுய கருத்தாக டூரிசம், இண்டஸ்ட்ரீஸ், பினான்சியல் செக்டர், மரைன் ரிசோர்ஸ் என்பன காணப்படுகின்றன. இலங்கையில் உள்ள மிகப்பெரிய பிரச்சனையாக காணப்படுவது இந்த மிகப்பெரிய கடல் வளத்தினை கொண்டுள்ள எமது நாடு அதனை வீண்விரியம் செய்வதோடு அதனை தொழிற்பேட்டைகள் கூடாக ஒரு பொருளாக அல்லது ஒரு முடிவு பொருளாக மாற்றுவதில் பல்வேறு சிக்கல்களை எதிர்நோக்கி காணப்படுகின்றது. அந்த வகையிலே நாங்கள் தற்பொழுது பார்த்து கொண்டிருப்பது இலங்கையினுடைய கடல் வளத்தை நாங்கள் இழந்து கொண்டிருக்கும் சூழ்நிலையை பார்க்கலாம். அதாவது தன்னுடைய நிலப்பரப்பை விட கடற்பரப்பினை அதிகமாக கொண்ட ஒரு நாடு தன்னுடைய கடல் வளத்தினை தன் அருகாமையில் உள்ள நாடுகளிடமும் அல்லது போனால் உலக நாடுகளிடமும் இழந்து வருவதை காண்கின்றோம். அத்தோடு எங்களுடைய கடல் வளத்தில் காணப்படுகின்ற மிக பிரதானமான இந்த முருகக்கற்பாறைகள் மற்றும் கடல் உயிரினங்கள் தொடர்பான பல்வேறு சுற்றுச்சூழல் சார்ந்த பிரச்சனைகளும் இதில் காணப்படுகின்றன. குறிப்பாக இந்திய மீனவர்களுடைய இருமடி வலைகளில் அகப்படும் இந்த முருகக்கற்பாறைகள் மற்றும் கடல் தாவரங்கள் போன்றவை மற்றும் அவர்களுடைய ரோலர் படகுகளால் ஏற்படும் தாக்கங்கள் தொடர்பிலும் நாங்கள் அவதானிக்கக்கூடியதாக இருக்கின்றது. அந்த வகையில் நாங்கள் இதை எவ்வாறு ஒரு இண்டஸ்ட்ரியலைஸ், அதாவது ஒரு பொருளாதார ரீதியாக அடுத்த கட்டத்துக்கு கொண்டு செல்ல வேண்டும் எனும் பொழுது அதனை நாங்கள் ஒரு தொழிற்பேட்டைகளை உருவாக்குவதன் மூலம் அதன் மூலம் ஒரு தொழில், அதாவது கௌரவமான தொழில்களை உருவாக்க முடியும். தொழில் வாய்ப்புகளை வழங்குவதற்கு பதிலாக தொழில்களை உருவாக்கி கொள்ள முடியும். கிரியேட்டிங் a new decent jobs என்பவற்றை இதில் நாங்கள் இனங்கண்டு கொள்ளலாம். அதே நேரத்தில் நாங்கள் கலன்களில் அடக்கப்பட்ட மீன்களை ஏற்றுமதி செய்வதனூடாக எமக்கு வருவாய் ஈட்ட முடியும். அதே நேரத்தில் இதுவரை காலமும் நாங்கள் இறக்குமதி செய்து கொண்டிருந்தவற்றை நாங்கள் நிறுத்துவதன் மூலம் தேவையற்ற இறக்குமதி செலவு குறைவடையும். அந்த வகையில் நாங்கள் இந்த கலன்களில் அடைக்கப்பட்ட மீன்கள் தொடர்பான ஒரு நிலைப்பேணான ஒரு தொழில் உருவாக்கத்தையும் பொருளாதார மேம்பாட்டினையும் பெற்றுக்கொள்வதற்கு ஒரு சிறந்த முறையாக இது காணப்படுகின்றது. இது இவ்வாறு இருக்கையில் கடந்த காலத்தில் பாராளுமன்றத்தில் கௌரவ வியாபாரத்துறை அமைச்சர் பந்துல குணவர்த்தன தெரிவிக்கையில் இலங்கை ஒரு தீவாக இருக்கும் பொழுது கூட இலங்கை 33 நாடுகளிடம் இருந்து கலன்களில் அடைக்கப்பட்ட மீன்களை கொள்வனவு செய்யும் ஒரு அவல நிலைக்கு நாங்கள் தள்ளப்பட்டு கொண்டிருக்கின்றோம். அடுத்ததாக நாங்கள் பார்த்து கொண்டிருப்பது இந்த பிளாஸ்டிக், அதாவது நெகிழி கழிவுகள் தொடர்பாக. இந்த நெகிழி கழிவுகள் வெறுமனே எங்களுடைய நிலம் சார்ந்த சூழலை மற்றும் மாசுபடுத்தாமல் அது எங்களுடைய கடல் சார்ந்ததும் டன் கணக்கில் கடலிலே கொட்டப்படுகின்ற இந்த பிளாஸ்டிக் கழிவுகளால் ஏற்படுகின்ற கடல்சார் உயிரினங்களுக்கு எதிராக ஏற்படுகின்ற பாதிப்புகள், அதன் நிமித்தமாக இந்த உயிர் சங்கிலியில் ஏற்படுகின்ற பாதிப்புகள் தொடர்பாக நாங்கள் அவதானிக்க முடிகின்றது. இதனை நாங்கள் எவ்வாறு எதிர்நோக்குவது, அதே நேரத்தில் எவ்வாறு நாங்கள் பொருளாதார ரீதியாகவும் இதனை வளப்படுத்துவது எனும் பொழுது கொட்டேஜ் இண்டஸ்ட்ரீஸ் அகெயின்ஸ்ட் தி பிளாஸ்டிக் எனும் ஒரு கருப்பொருளின் கீழ் நாங்கள் வந்து கொள்ள முடியும். அதாவது இந்த குடிசை கைத்தொழில்கள் மூலமாக இந்த பிளாஸ்டிக்குகளுக்கு எதிரான ஒரு வளர்ச்சியை நாங்கள் ஏற்படுத்த முடியும். குறிப்பாக இந்த உயிரியல் ரீதியாக தகனமடையக்கூடிய பொருட்களை கொண்டு எவ்வாறு பிளாஸ்டிக்கு எதிரான மாற்று பொருட்களை உருவாக்குதல் என்பது தொடர்பாக நாங்கள் மிகுந்த கரிசனை எடுக்க வேண்டும். அதிலும் கூட இந்த சமூக ரீதியாக பிளாஸ்டிக்கு எதிரான மாற்று பயன்பாடு கொண்ட பொருட்களை ஊக்குவிப்பதோடு இந்த பெண் தலைமைத்துவ குடும்பங்கள், மாற்றுத்திறனாளிகள் என்போருக்கு இதன் மூலம் புதிய தொழில்களை உருவாக்கி அவர்களை வலுப்படுத்துவதோடு அவர்களுக்கான மூலப்பொருட்களை எமது சமூக ரீதியிலேயே கிடைக்கக்கூடிய இந்த உக்கக்கூடிய சேதனம் அடையக்கூடிய இயற்கை கழிவுகள் மூலம் அவர்களுக்கு பாரிய வசதிகளை ஏற்படுத்துவதோடு அவர்களுக்கு அது தொடர்பான பிரத்யேகமான பயிற்சிகளையும் அவர்களது முடிவு பொருளுக்கான ஒரு சந்தைப்படுத்தலையும் நாங்கள் கட்டாயம் வழங்க வேண்டும். இவ்வாறு நாங்கள் அடுத்த கட்டம் நகர்வோமாக இருந்தால் இலங்கை பொருளாதார ரீதியாகவும் சரி, சமூக ரீதியாகவும் சரி, சுற்றாடல் ரீதியாகவும் சரி ஒரு நிலைப்பேணான நாட்டினை நாங்கள் அடைந்து இலக்கு 8 அடைய முடியும். Thank you for the opportunity.
Good afternoon. I am Thanuki Gunasinghe and I will be presenting to you Sustainable Development Goal number 9, which focuses on building resilient infrastructure and promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization and fostering innovation. Now, this principal Sustainable Development Goal is made up of 8 targets. Some of the targets that caught my attention are 1. Developing quality, reliable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure, including those which are regional and trans-border, to support economic development and human well-being with a focus on providing affordable and equitable access to all. Secondly, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization in order to significantly raise the industry's share of employment and GDP by 2030 in line with national circumstances, or in other words, the national capacity. Thirdly, increasing the access of small-scale industries to financial services such as affordable credit. And finally, upgrading infrastructure in industries in order to make them sustainable, resource use efficient, adopting cleaner green technologies. Each of these targets have their own unique indicators, which in my way of understanding it are mechanisms for measuring progress in terms of each target. Let's look at 2 such indicators to understand the progress Sri Lanka has made so far under the 9th Sustainable Development Goal. I'm going to take target number 9.2.1, which focuses on raising the industry share of employment and GDP by 2030 in line with national circumstances. The first indicator for this particular target is manufacturing value added as a proportion of GDP and per capita. We look at the GDP portion, and that percentage in Sri Lanka, as per the last census conducted in 2016, stands at 18%. And the manufacturing employment as a proportion of total employment also stands at 18% at the year 2016. It would be best if we could have a more frequent census of statistics like this to better understand the progress that we are making. Another target like this that we can look at is the one that deals with increasing access to financial services such as affordable credit for small scale industries. Now that is something that is done every 10 years. So the last census was taken in 2013-14 and Sri Lanka stood at 2.7%. I'm sure that we have definitely improved by now, hopefully. So I see the focus of this goal, in my opinion, is resilience. The government and the private sector should work hand in hand to proactively come up with strategies that incorporate holistic and comprehensive resilience into the design, the structure, financing, operations, and maintenance of all the existing as well as future infrastructure projects through homegrown innovative mechanisms. It would also be useful for a country like ours to focus on building climate resilient infrastructure in industries. More frequent and committed surveys would also be of use to keep tabs on the progress as we go along. Thank you for your time.
When 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development were formulated, the reduction of inequality was made a goal in its own rights in SDG 10, which urged goal community to reduce inequality within and among country. Almost 2 in 10 people reported having personally experienced discrimination on at least one of the grounds established by international human rights. Moreover, women are more likely to be victims of discrimination than men. Among those disability, 3 in 10 people personally experience discrimination, with higher level still among women with disability. Goal 10 called for reducing inequality in income as those based on age, sex, disability, race, origin, religion, and other status within the country. The UN has defined 10 targets and 11 indicators for represent the metrics by which the world aims to track whether these targets are achieved. When it comes to Sri Lanka has been incorporating the SDGs into its national policy framework since the endorsement of 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development. Sri Lanka has taken several momentous initiatives. The most important one is the Sustainable Development Act is in 2017, which establishes the legal framework to implement the SDGs with improved institutional and policy coherence. Under this act, the Sustainable Development Council has been established which formulate related national policy and guides new development projects. Reducing inequality requires transformative change. Great effort are needed to eradicate extreme poverty, hunger, and invest more in health, education, social protection, and decent jobs, especially for young people, migrants, and other vulnerable communities. So, ensure equal opportunity and reduce inequality of outcomes, including eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and promoting appropriate legislation, policies, and action in this regard. According to my view, government can intervene to promote equality and reduce inequality poverty through the tax and benefit system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayuda. Now I'm here to talk about Sustainable City Planning and Communities, goal number 11 in Sustainable Development Goal. You have heard of this goal before. I think you have heard of this goal before. Why we want this goal in Sri Lanka? I think a significant percentage of Sri Lanka population still lives in shanties and slums. They have largely lost their ability to live a healthy life. As Sri Lanka population grew, unplanned infrastructure and services and unplanned urban area begin to emerge. There are many cities in Sri Lanka that are vulnerable to climate change and natural disasters due to unplanned city planning that goes against environmental reports. It is therefore important to strive to avoid human and economic losses that are currently being experienced due to this overpopulation. Why should we think about this city planning so much? I think the city is not a concrete jungle full of buildings. Natural disasters have the potential to disrupt everyone's lifestyles. So we can't even think about city planning without forgetting the environment. It can be said that Sri Lanka has understood this fact. The Sustainable Development Act number 19 of 2070 prepared the necessary legal framework for this, and the Sustainable Development Council has been established under Section 3 to look into the matter. And Section 11 states that national policy and strategies for sustainable development must be consistent with the Sustainable Development Goal and their associated goals. And Article 13 mentioned that every ministry, department, local government, provincial council body should conduct environmental project and ensure environmental and social security for new development project. However, poorly planned city planning in Sri Lanka has led to cost slums, suburbs, greenhouse gases, chaotic traffic, and natural disasters. According to current data, more than 70% of Sri Lanka population will be urbanized by 2030. As a result, demand for water and other natural resources will increase, and we must be prepared from that today. The government has formulated a plan for city planning. You might think, is it expensive to put sustainable practice in place? I think the cost is minimal in comparison with the benefit. We need to develop a vision for our building, street, neighborhood act accordingly. You think, are there enough jobs in Sri Lanka? Can children go to school safely? Can we go for work with our family at night? What is the air quality like? What are the shared public spaces like? What is the nearest public transportation service? Think about it. So take an active interest in the governance and management of your city. Advocate for the kind of city you believe you need. Thank you.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். இன்று நான் ஐக்கிய நாட்டு சபையின் 12ஆம் நிலைப்பின் அபிவிருத்தி திட்ட இலக்காகிய பொறுப்பு வாய்ந்த நுகர்வு மற்றும் உற்பத்தியை எவ்வாறு மேற்கொள்ளலாம் என்பது தொடர்பில் உங்களுடன் கலந்துரையாடலாம் என விளைக்கின்றேன். அந்த வகையில் பொறுப்பு வாய்ந்த உற்பத்தி மற்றும் நுகர்வு என்பதனால் கருதப்படுவது யாது? இந்த தொடர்பில் ஒஸ்லோ சிம்போசியத்தில் பின்வருமாறு கூறப்பட்டுள்ளது. அதாவது நாம் நுகரும் சேவைகள் மற்றும் எமது உற்பத்திகள் எமது வாழ்க்கை தரத்தை உயர்த்த வேண்டும் என்பதுடன் இயற்கை வள பயன்பாடு மற்றும் நச்சுப் பொருட்களின் பயன்பாட்டை குறைத்து சுற்றாடலுக்கு பாதிப்பில்லாத வகையிலும் எமது எதிர்கால சந்ததியினருக்கு பாதிப்பில்லாத வகையிலும் எமது உற்பத்திகள் மற்றும் எமது நுகர்வுகள் அமைய வேண்டும் என்பதாகும். அந்த வகையில் இது தொடர்பில் இலங்கையில் உள்ள ஏற்பாடுகளை பார்த்தோமேயானால் அரசியலமைப்பின் உறுப்புரை 27, 14 மற்றும் 28F என்பவற்றின் ஊடாகவும் நீதி சட்டங்களான மைன்ஸ் அண்ட் மினரல் ஆக்டின் உறுப்புரை 61 மற்றும் நேஷனல் என்வாயன்மெண்ட் ஆக்டின் உறுப்புரை 23 என்பவை இதற்கு சிறந்த உதாரணங்களாகும். இது தவிர தீர்ப்பு சட்டங்களை பொறுத்தவரை எப்பாவல புலன்குழும வழக்கில் ஜஸ்டிஸ் அமரசிங்க பின்வருமாறு குறிப்பிடுகின்றார். நாம் எப்பாவல மற்றும் நாட்டின் ஏனைய பிரதேசங்களில் வளங்களை நுகரும் பொழுது எதிர்கால சந்ததியினருக்காகவும் அவற்றை பேண வேண்டும். நமது கலாச்சாரம் பாரம்பரியம் என்பவற்றையும் பேணி சுகாதாரம் மற்றும் சூழல் பாதுகாப்பு என்பவற்றையும் கருத்தில் கொள்ள வேண்டும் என்கின்றார். இது தவிர ப்ரொடெக்ஷன் ஆஃப் லைசனிங் ஸ்கீம் இன் 1991 ஸ்கீம் இன் 2002 என்பன இலங்கையில் மேற்கொள்ளப்பட்ட பல்வேறு சிறந்த திட்டங்களாகும். இவ்வாறான பல்வேறு சிறந்த திட்டங்கள் இருப்பினும் இலங்கையில் இன்று அதிகரித்து வரும் சனத்தொகை பெருக்கத்தின் காரணமாக வளங்களுக்கான தேவை அதிகரித்துள்ளது. இதனால் வள சுரண்டல்கள் அதிகம் இடம்பெறுகின்றன. மறுபுறம் சுற்றாடல் பாதிப்பு அதிகம் இடம்பெறுகின்றன. எனவே இவற்றை எவ்வாறு தடுக்க வேண்டும் என்பது தொடர்பில் நேஷனல் பாலிசி ஆன் சஸ்டைனபிள் கன்சம்ஷன் அண்ட் ப்ரொடக்ஷன் ஆஃப் ஸ்ரீலங்கா 2018 என்ற தலைப்பில் ஒரு திட்ட முன்மொழிவு செய்யப்பட்டிருந்தது. இதில் குறிப்பாக வளி மற்றும் நீர் என்பன மனிதர்களின் பல்வேறு செயற்பாடுகள் மற்றும் தொழிற்சாலை கழிவு வெளியேற்றம் என்பவற்றால் பாதிக்கப்படுகின்றது. இது தவிர இண்டஸ்ட்ரியல் செக்டரை பொறுத்தவரை இன்று அவற்றிலிருந்து உற்பத்தி செய்யப்படும் பல்வேறு உற்பத்திகள் மற்றும் உணவுப் பொருட்கள் மற்றும் அழகு சாதன பொருட்களில் அதிகம் நச்சுக்கள், அதாவது நச்சு பதார்த்தங்கள் கலக்கப்படுகின்றன. இவை சூழலுக்கும் எமக்கும் அதிகம் பாதிப்பை ஏற்படுத்துகின்றது. இது தவிர இன்று டிரான்ஸ்போர்டேஷனை பொறுத்தவரை போக்குவரத்தில் அதிகமாக தனியார் வாகனங்கள் பயன்பாடு அதிகரித்துள்ளது. இவற்றிலிருந்து வெளியேறும் புகை வெளியேற்றம் காரணமாக வழி மிக விரைவாக மாசடைகின்றது. ஆகவே இவ்வாறு நாம் நுகரும் மற்றும் எமது உற்பத்திகளில் பல்வேறு பிரச்சனைகள் காணப்படுவதால் சூழல் பாதிப்பு ஏற்படுகின்றது. எனவே இவற்றிலிருந்து நாம் எவ்வாறு தடுக்க வேண்டும் என்பது தொடர்பிலும் பார்க்க வேண்டியுள்ளது. அந்த வகையில் எமது அறிவை, அதாவது சிறந்த உற்பத்தி மற்றும் சேவை நுகர்வு தொடர்பாக எம்மிடம் சிறந்த அறிவு காணப்பட வேண்டும். சுற்றாடலுக்கு பாதிப்பில்லாத முறையில் அவற்றை நாம் நுகர வேண்டும். அதற்காக பாடசாலை கல்வி திட்டங்களில் கூட மாணவர்களுக்கு இது கற்பிக்கப்பட வேண்டும். அது தவிர நாம் எவ்வாறு நிலைப்பேன் அதாவது எவ்வாறு நாம் சூழலுக்கு பாதிப்பில்லாத வகையில் நமது நுகர்வுகளை மேற்கொள்ள வேண்டும் என்பது தொடர்பாக மக்களுக்கு அரசாங்கத்தால் பல்வேறு நிகழ்ச்சி திட்டங்கள் நடத்தப்பட வேண்டும். அது மட்டுமின்றி நாம் வள பயன்பாட்டிற்கு புதிய வளங்களை அதிக நுகர்வதை தவிர்த்து இருக்கும் வளங்களை எவ்வாறு மீள் சுழற்சி செய்தல் என்பது தொடர்பாக நாம் சிந்திக்க வேண்டியுள்ளது. அது மட்டுமன்றி உணவு மற்றும் டிரான்ஸ்போர்ட், அதாவது போக்குவரத்து மற்றும் வீடமைப்பு திட்டங்களின் நிலைப்பெண் திட்டங்களை நாம் செயற்படுத்த வேண்டியுள்ளது. உணவை பொறுத்தவரை அசேதன பொருட்களுக்கு பதிலாக சேதன பொருட்களை நாம் பயன்படுத்தி பயிற்சியை மேற்கொள்வதன் மூலம் மண் வளத்தை பேணலாம். இது தொடர்பாக விவசாயிகள் அறிவுறுத்தப்பட வேண்டும். போக்குவரத்தை பொறுத்தவரை இன்று பேட்டரி மூலம் இயங்கும் கார்கள் இதற்கு சிறந்த தீர்வாகும். இது தவிர நகர்ப்புறங்களில் இன்று நாம் பொது சொகுசு சேவையை மேம்படுத்தலாம். அது தவிர வீடமைப்பு திட்டத்தில் மரங்கள் தரிக்கப்படுவதை தவிர்த்து அதிகமாக சூழலுக்கு பாதிப்பில்லாத வகை உற்பத்திகளை கொண்டு நாம் வீடமைப்பு திட்டத்தை மேம்படுத்தலாம். எனவே இவ்வாறான உற்பத்திகளை நாம் மேற்கொள்வோமாக இருந்தால் மட்டுமே எமது எதிர்காலத்தில் இந்த 12ஆம் இலக்காகிய சிறந்த உற்பத்தி மற்றும் சேவையை எம்மால் அடைய முடியும் என்பதில் எந்த சந்தேகமும் இல்லை. நன்றி.
Thank you, Suhada. Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Sustainable Development Goal number 13. SDG number 13 calls on countries to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts by implementing commitments to the UN Framework Convention on Change, as well as by improving public awareness of the need for climate action Crucially, SDG 13 also calls on countries to integrate effective climate action measures into national policies. As an island state, Sri Lanka faces the threat of rising sea levels, floods, landslides, prolonged dry spells, and other recurrent natural disasters, which cause destruction, displacement, and economic loss. Only last year, Cyclone Storm Buravi brought heavy rains over the northern and eastern part of the island, causing thousands to evacuate into safety centers. These threats stand as a reminder of the serious flooding in 2016 and 2017 and the Indian Ocean tsunami that had such a devastating impact on Sri Lanka. The government of Sri Lanka on its national policy framework has included several measures, notably a key policy on sustainable development management, which aims to integrate the SDGs fully into the framework. The UN has supported the National Adaptation Plan for Climate Change Impacts 2016-2025 in Sri Lanka, which has been prepared in line with the broad set of guidelines set forth by the UNFCCC. The adaptation plan has helped outline a methodological framework through which Sri Lanka is set firmly on the path to becoming a resilient, vibrant, and sustainable country, and which provides a solid foundation with which information management, technological development, policy, and governance, coordination, and resource mobilization can be strengthened. As UN Secretary General Guterres said at the Petersburg Dialogue, they say it is darkest just before the dawn. These are dark days, but they are not days without hope. We have a short and rare opportunity to change our world for the better. Even with the glimpse of some rays of hope, we are still squarely immersed in a pandemic that has challenged all countries. We must use the experience of COVID-19 as an impetus to speed up our efforts to secure a safe and sustainable future for all. It's time to reinvent and re-energize the way we cooperate and reach decisions with a renewed sense of solidarity and urgency. And the next conference of parties to the Paris Agreement in Glasgow will be the perfect platform for this. It aligns perfectly with the central objective of the United Nations for 2021 to build a truly global coalition for carbon neutrality. What steps can we take to move towards this ambitious goal? We need to put a price on carbon to shift the tax burden from income to carbon and from taxpayers to polluters. They integrate the goal of carbon neutrality into all income and fiscal policies and decisions. Funding should follow to the green economy, resilience adaptation, and just transition programs. We need to align all public and private financial flows behind the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Multilateral region and national development institutions and private banks must all commit to align their lending to the goal net zero objective. Companies need to adjust their business model and investors need to demand information from companies on the resilience of those models. Thank you.
SDG 14 is termed Life Below Water, dedicated towards the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. It brings to light and attempts to address through national and international cooperation key areas such as prevention of marine pollution, reduction of ocean acidification, promoting sustainable fishing practices, and protecting key marine areas. The undeniable importance of SDG 14 comes along with the vital ecosystem services provided by the oceans and the wealth of resources they contain, which directly support the global population's economic, social, and environmental needs. By 2020, the UN Secretary General reported that around the world, efforts continue to curb illegal fishing practices, with most states signing and implementing international protocols. On the other hand, waters being covered as protected marine areas have increased twofold since 2010. However, the problem of the decline of sustainability of global fisheries stocks still remains, alongside the need to protect key marine areas and small-scale fishers and increased investment in ocean science. Oil spills, plastic and microplastic pollution are some other looming threats. Being an island nation heavily reliant on its surrounding oceans, the need to effectively implement SDG 14 is imperative for Sri Lanka. We continue to reap vast benefits from waters under our national jurisdiction while enjoying the ecosystem services provided by coral reefs, mangroves, seagrass beds, and so on. Human activities such as dumping of garbage, wastewater, agrochemicals, and industrial pollutants, and over-extraction of resources are some of the major threats to the oceans around the country. By 2019, Sri Lanka was the 5th largest plastic polluter in the world. While illegal fishing by South Indian fishermen continue to pose challenges, spreading of invasive species and continuation of destructive fishing practices such as bottom trawling are being reported as well. In 2020, the government forwarded a proposal to re-allow spearfishing in Sri Lankan waters. The coastal zones face similar threats from large-scale clearance of mangroves and unsuccessful coastal aquaculture projects. On a positive note, Sri Lanka continues to seek legislative and policy means to ensure the protection of the surrounding seas. It has declared a significant number of special management areas both in the coastal zone and the ocean regions. The more famous marine protected areas include Hikkaduwa, Pigeon Island, and the Bar Reef Sanctuary. State and private institutions continue on infrastructure development in the fisheries sector. Sri Lanka continues to implement its related international obligations, including the UN FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, and also became a party to the Commonwealth Blue Charter recently. Coral reef regeneration programs continue in areas such as Kalpitia, while NGOs such as the Pearl Protectors have emerged with a special focus on ocean conservation. Sri Lankan Navy and the Coast Guard in particular are actively engaged in conservation and law enforcement operations. The way forward for Sri Lanka clearly lies in developing a comprehensive framework for sustainable use of the oceans, public participation, raising more awareness at a community level, and focusing more on enforcement of the existing laws. Thank you.
SDG 15, Life on Land, consists with targets like to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forest, combat desertification, halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. In every year, with an estimated amount of 30 million hectares of forest being lost worldwide, SDG 15 focuses on ensuring the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of ecosystems. When we take a look at the Sri Lankan context, Sri Lanka is identified as one of the 35 biodiversity hotspots in the world, with a forest area of 29.7% of total land of the country. Natural ecosystems in Sri Lanka accommodate numerous species, and a considerable number of species are identified as threatened species in Sri Lanka. According to the SDG Index and Dashboards Global Report, Sri Lanka ranks second last country in the Red List Index of Species Survival. Deforestation is identified as the major cause of the loss of biodiversity in Sri Lanka. The key aspects that have led to deforestation include the growth of the export plantation economy in the wet zone, the policies on commercial timber extraction, colonization schemes, and irrigation development in the dry zone. The Center for Environmental and Nature Studies currently estimates that Sri Lanka lost more than 10 acres of public forest on a daily basis in 2020. One major incident of deforestation was settling 1,500 families in Kallaru area of the Wilpath Forest Reserve. In November 2020, the Court of Appeal delivered a landmark court ruling on this matter and ordered the former minister to contribute from his personal funds to plant trees equivalent to the reserve forest area that was used for the resettlement. Another crucial setback regarding the conservation of forests was releasing 690,000 hectares, which were considered as the other state forests for non-forest uses. On the other hand, Ministry of Wildlife issued a gazette declaring 69 forest complexes in 15 districts as protected forest reserves. Further, land degradation has become a significant environmental issue in Sri Lanka, and it is associated with deforestation. It is particularly a problem in sensitive areas such as the hill country with steep slopes, high-intensity rainfall, and inappropriate land use practices leading to heavy degradation of land. Also, 41 wetland sites of Sri Lanka are identified under Ramsar Convention for their international significance. Even though these wetlands are affected by pollution from urban and industrial facilities, infrastructure and tourism development, garbage disposal, shrimp farming, and encroachments. Speaking about the biodiversity loss, the Committee on Public Accounts has been informed that the highest number of elephant deaths in the world due to the human-elephant conflict is annually reported in Sri Lanka. It was further revealed that on average, 272 elephants are reported dead for a year in Sri Lanka due to the human-elephant conflict, but 407 elephants had died last year alone. Further, it is reported that 12 leopards succumbed to snaring in 2020, and one of among was a rare black leopard. These type of incidents mainly occur due to the capturing of natural habitats of wild animals. Apart from these incidents, such as overexploitation of endangered animals, poaching, illegal logging, and illegal sand mining took place in Sri Lanka over the past years. 2020 being the year of eco-devastation in the history of Sri Lanka, we have to change the approach in addressing these issues. It is evident that several positions that were taken to speed up development has caused cause a considerable number of damage to the ecosystems. So the national level policy should be brought up to balance the environmental conservation and development. In addition to that, steps should be taken to increase stakeholder engagement and awareness in order to reduce the information deficit through innovative and diverse participatory governance models. Thank you.
பொதுவாக நாட்டினுடைய அபிவிருத்தி அரசியல், கலாச்சாரம், பொருளாதாரம், சுற்றாடல் சார்ந்த அனைத்து விடயங்களில் தங்கியிருந்தாலும் சமாதானம் எங்கு இல்லையோ அங்கு எத்தகைய முயற்சிகள் அபிவிருத்தியில் மேற்கொண்டாலும் அது வினைத்திறனாக அமையாது என்பது அனைவரும் அறிந்த ஒரு விடயமாகும். 2016ஆம் ஆண்டு UNDP-யினுடைய வருடாந்த அறிக்கையின்படி சட்டவாட்சி, மனித உரிமைகள் மற்றும் நிலைபெறும் அபிவிருத்தியினுடைய நோக்காக இலக்கு 16ஆன சமாதானம் மற்றும் நீதியை கட்டமைத்தலானது கூறப்பட்டது. சில பிராந்தியங்களில் சமாதானம், பாதுகாப்பு என்பன காணப்பட்டும் ஏனைய பிராந்தியங்களில் வன்முறை மற்றும் முரண்பாடு ஆகியன காணப்படுகின்ற சந்தர்ப்பத்தில் அங்கு எத்தகைய ஒரு அபிவிருத்தியை மேற்கொண்டாலும் அது எதிர்கால சந்ததியினருடைய நன்மைக்கு பங்களிப்பாக அமையாது. அந்த அடிப்படையில் இலக்கு 16னுடைய நோக்கங்களாக முதலாவது, அனைவருக்கும் சமமான முறையில் நியாயம் கிடைப்பதனை உறுதிப்படுத்த வேண்டும். அவர்களுக்கு நியாயம் கிடைக்கின்றதா என்பதற்கு உரிய வழிவகைகளை செய்ய வேண்டும். அடுத்த நோக்காக, நிலைபெறும் அபிவிருத்திக்காக பாரபட்சமற்ற வகையில் சட்டங்கள், கொள்கைகள், கோட்பாடுகளை உருவாக்குதல் மற்றும் நடைமுறைப்படுத்தல். மூன்றாவதாக, சர்வதேச மற்றும் உள்நாட்டு மட்டங்களில் சட்டவாட்சியை மேம்படுத்தல். அடுத்ததாக, இலக்கு 16ஆனது இலங்கையுடன் தொடர்பு படுத்தப்படும் விடயங்களாக முதலில் ஜனநாயகம், இரண்டாவதாக சட்டவாட்சி, மூன்றாவதாக மனித உரிமைகளை குறிப்பிட முடியும். அந்த வகையில் முதலாவதாக ஜனநாயகம் எவ்வாறு இலக்கு 16உடன் தொடர்பு படுகின்றது என்பதை நோக்குவோமாயின், அரசியல் ரீதியான தீர்மானங்கள் யாவும் எடுக்கின்ற சந்தர்ப்பத்தில் அவை அடிப்படை உரிமை மற்றும் சுதந்திரத்தை பாதுகாக்கின்ற வகை இருக்க வேண்டும். அவ்வாறு உள்ள போதே அது இலக்கு 16னை அடைவதற்கு உறுதுணையாக இருக்கும். அடுத்ததாக, சட்டவாட்சியினை நோக்குகின்ற சந்தர்ப்பத்தில் நிர்வாகம், நீதி மற்றும் சட்டத்துறை ஆகிய 3 துறைகளிடையே அதிகார பரவலாக்கம் காணப்பட்டது என்பதையும் அதிகாரங்கள் உரிய முறையில் பிரயோகிக்கப்படுகின்றன என்பதனையும் உறுதிப்படுத்துவதனூடாக நிலைபெறும் அபிவிருத்தியில் இலக்கு 16னை அடைய முடியும். அடுத்ததாக, இலக்கு 16னை மேலும் உறுதிப்படுத்த முன்வைக்கின்ற பரிந்துரைகளாக நாட்டில் சமாதானத்தை கட்டியெழுப்புதல், நீதி அனைவரும் பெற்றுக் கொள்வதற்கு வழிவகுத்தல் மற்றும் இயல்பானவரை பிணக்குகளை பரஸ்பர ரீதியில் தீர்க்க முனைதலை குறிப்பிட முடியும். நன்றி.
நன்றி ரோஜினி. 17 goal. Actually, I consider this is the discussion goal for partnership of achieving the sustainable development. Also, I believe this as the thread that binds all these 16 goals. I believe cooperation should go in sequence from individual person, family, ethnic group, state, and from regional cooperation to international cooperation. If this does not happen, grassroots will become weak. It's pleasure to say the government of Sri Lanka pays attention to this procedure for promoting cooperation. After enacting Number 19 of 2017 Sustainable Development Act, we were able to establish a formal legal framework and the Sustainable Development Council, giving priority to national security, adapting and aligning foreign policy, and an administration free of corruption, a constitution that fulfills the expectations of the people, and effective human resources, human-centric economic development, a society based on technology, development of physical resources, sustainable environmental development, and a disciplined country are 10 basic principles included to our SDG policy framework. Every Sri Lankan stands for supporting these 10 basic principles. In 2018, our country is approaching the level of upper middle income earners. As a result of this, there is and decreasement of official development assistance received as a part of GDP. Because of this reason, Sri Lanka should move towards other finance and capacity development strategies locally and internationally. As a method under Goal 17, using international partnership with developing countries, we need to focus on increasing the tax and revenue collections, strengthening the mobility of local resources. Despite the fact that during this pandemic period, it is a difficult and challenging task. So we have to pay more attention to promote partnership of private sector. We should promote eco-friendly technologies and encouraging knowledge-driven foreign direct investment using trade policies. We have to focus on increasing Sri Lanka's export earnings and foreign direct investments. When entering into bilateral and regional trade investment agreements, we have to consider to improve regional partnership with countries which have regional emerging economics to liberalize investment in the manufacturing and service sector. This fact also help to achieve sustainable development in Sri Lanka under Goal 17. On the other hand, human resources are the most important resource in sustainable development. For bringing schools, youth, civil society, and the private sector together and to inspire these attitudes, we can hold development circles, environmental pilot projects. As I mentioned before, public partnership participant is a must to success this development process. The public-private partnership will also focus on promoting industries such as pottery, batik, and ornaments to improve the quality of lives. Civil society activities who are requesting policy formulation from the government to maintain forest population and eco-friendly energy generation methods can help for sustainable development also. Although we have a sustainable development policy, there is the problem of failing to come to a common policy on who should or should not be a partner in a development project and how it should be decided. Finally, we all need to understand the path that Sri Lanka is taking to achieve the 2030 goal is really, really difficult one. Even though we must say that the journey with public and private partnerships, foreign investors, voluntary organizations, civil society activities, and most of all the intelligent people who love the country and the environment is always a positive and possible one. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Now that we have an understanding of the SDGs and the interventions by Sri Lanka towards achieving them, I now take you to the second session, which is also the main session in our agenda, the panel discussion. To start off, let me extend a very warm welcome to the esteemed panel of experts joining us today. Professor Erandhati Lokupitia, Director, Center for Environmental Initiatives, University of Colombo; Shyami Puvimanasinghe, Human Rights Officer, Right to Development Section, United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights; Benjamin Scatcher, Human Rights Officer, Right to Development Section, United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights; and Gaynor Curry, Human Rights Officer, Sustainable Development Section, United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. While this session will also be followed by a Q&A session, we request you to kindly send us your questions through the chat. To take forward the proceedings, I would now like to invite Dr. Kokila Konasinghe, Senior Lecturer at the Faculty of Law, University of Colombo, to moderate the session. Over to you, Dr. Kokila.
Okay, with a very happy note, I would like to start with appreciating all the efforts put by the final year law students. Very well done, and congratulations to doing this under a very limited resources as well as challenges posed by the pandemic situation. Very pleasant and productive afternoon, everyone. Let me first welcome with the traditional Sri Lankan greeting, Ayubowan, which means may you have live longer, may you live longer in good health. Idyllic image of traditional Sri Lanka can be illustrated in a very interesting tagline that has been enshrining for 2,500 years of the written history of Sri Lanka. That is, Vavai, Dagabai, Gamai, Pansara. The English translation can be like this: tank, shrine, village, and family unit. Sri Lankans believe in order to establish just and prosperous society, the governance rules need to make a fair balance between these four elements, which is tanks, shrines, village, and family units. Ancient kings have built large number of reservoirs in Sri Lanka. This represents the prosper. Major development projects such as building reservoirs certainly reflect maintaining a balance between environmental conservation and economic development. A shrine represents the harmonious lifestyle led by religious principles and philosophies. Village represents the society, which is one of the main components of the traditional governance system in Sri Lanka. Pansal means family units. That's how the Sri Lankans say in their day-to-day life, Paul Pansal. So this family unit represents healthy partnerships in a society which lead to a harmonious and prosperous life with sustainable living standards. The Sri Lankan culture and the society that was once led by these principles now in the 21st century further attempts to realize sustainable development goals by 2030 according to the United Nations guidelines. I moderate this panel discussion in that philosophical understanding of sustainable development goals. Each panelist will have a valuable 10 minutes to enlighten the participants on the respective topic. Let me first invite Professor Erandathi Lokupitiya, the Director of the Center for Environmental Initiatives of the University of Colombo. Professor Lokupitiya, I, as an academic myself, would be very curious to know what is the modern agenda of sustainable development within the university community in Sri Lanka. How successful you have been so far in implementing sustainable development goals, particularly within the University of Colombo context, and what is the way forward? Over to you, Professor Lokupitiya.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kokila. And first, I would like to thank you and the organizing committee, all those young final year students of law faculty, and everybody else for inviting me to be a part of this program today. So, I mean, all the sustainable development goals are important for a university. Starting from quality education, everything is very important. But for today's panel discussion, I thought I will focus two main SDGs that I think would be very important for our campus environment. So those are SDG 12 and SDG 13. So as you all know, SDG 12 means responsible consumption and production. Of course, you already heard about this from the students. I was very impressed by all the information they had gathered on the sustainable development goals. So when we talk about the sustainability on campus, I thought the best would be to concentrate on these two: responsible consumption and production, SDG 12, and SDG 13, climate action. So why did I choose, for your question, why do I concentrate on these two, is because I find these two as quite interlinked. So it's easy for me to bring out the things I want to tell today. And just like Professor Vasantha mentioned, these SDGs are interlinked. So if we consider responsible consumption and production, which says that we have to use only the minimum amount of material or resources and energy so that there will be more for the others as well, right? That is the term sustainable means, plus responsible consumption. That means we shouldn't use resources unnecessarily. So on campus, we have to be concerned about minimizing energy use. We have to use only the required amount of energy, and even water use, right? So water conservation, energy conservation, those things are very important. And also production. So what you produce to the produced in this campus, also what you discharge to the environment, that should be minimum, right? So that is when you become responsible. So if you use resources and energy unnecessarily, that will definitely lead to climate change. That's why I thought these are very important, because if you use energy unnecessarily, as you all know, in the past in this country, most of the energy was generated by, it was hydroelectricity, but now 50-50 or sometimes even up to 80%, it's thermal energy. It's produced by coal power. So that is, you all know that burning of coal or fossil fuels lead to carbon dioxide emissions, which has been the main cause for climate change. That's why now we have this SDG goal, climate action, to combat climate change, because anthropogenic or human-induced climate change has been mostly due to our own activities that has led to increased release of carbon dioxide, mostly up to about 80%, and the other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So that's why when we consume energy or resources unnecessarily, even if you use any product unnecessarily, waste products on campus, that means you need more and more products. And if these products are energy consuming products, I mean energy intensive products, because in the process of the production of something, there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions involved that can lead to climate change. So the simpler your lifestyle is, the better it would be for your environment. Even in purchasing something, if you can think twice, is this really necessary? Otherwise, you will be adding some waste to the environment only, right? So you have to be concerned about what you consume on campus and what you release to the environment, or what you dispose of as waste. You have to be concerned. So there is this famous saying which we learned as kids, Mega se boho penidodam tibe, වැඩිය කඩන නරක ළමයි හැම නොවේ. අපි actually this thing is always reminded by Mr. Sena Pilis, who was the former CEO of National Cleaner Production Center. Sustainable development is clearly there. කොච්චර දොඩම් තිබුණත් අපි වැඩිය කඩන්නේ නැහැ. We plug only නංගිටයි මට අවශ්‍ය ප්‍රමාණය විතරයි we plug. So that means sustainability is there even from our past. So we need to continue it. So in consuming, you have to be very careful. And also what we dispose to the environment. So, and so if we waste something, even e-waste. Now there are students and there are people who like to buy whatever new product that comes to the market. And when you buy it, do you think, is this really necessary? Can it be waste someday? Because e-waste has become a big problem in this country now. And also on campus, we have set up this nice waste segregation system. But I find there are some people, they are very irresponsible. Although all the bins are properly labeled, they don't mind. They simply dump it in whatever bin they find. So you have to be very mindful in doing anything, because it can affect your environment. When there is proper waste segregation, we introduce that system because now we have a waste storage center on campus. So all these segregated waste, the recyclable ones, they go to the waste storage center, and recyclers come and take those waste materials. So it gives some income to the university, plus then our waste becomes a resource. You know, it doesn't become a waste anymore. And so that is why at least we need to have 3R concept. As an individual, think about what you generate to the environment. So try to be a person with minimum waste. Even in your consumption patterns, think that, can this be waste someday? So minimize your waste generation. Plus also learn to segregate your waste so that all the recyclable waste can on campus that can go to the waste storage center, where it will be used for some usable product. And then the biodegradable waste, then it can be used for composting. And right now all the biodegradable waste on campus is taken away for a piggery to feed some pigs. Even that is some use, but we can, in the future we are going to have some composting facilities. So that is also good, because then we simply don't waste anything, because compost can be used for our plants, and now there is recyclable waste going to waste storage center. That way we can minimize all the waste that goes to landfill sites where the bad thing happens. So if you become very careless, and if you don't become, if you cannot become mindful, all that mixed waste would go to landfill site. It will be taken away by the CMC. Then what would happen is at these landfill sites, all this waste decomposes through anaerobic processes, which releases methane emissions. So as you all know, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that can cause climate change or global warming. Even methane, it has a global warming potential of 30. That means it has a potential of causing global warming 30 times compared to carbon dioxide. So if you simply become careless and send your waste to landfill site, that waste will end up emitting methane, which has a much higher global warming potential. So that's why you have to be very concerned, be supportive of what's going on in campus. I'm sure you all are very good students. That's why you are having this event today. So please help us having this system on campus. If you see someone doing something bad, just tell them. You can, of course, nicely tell someone. And now we removed all the lunch sheets from campus canteens. Today also some students talked about the bad side of plastics. So actually in 2017, we made the university a polythene-free zone, but it has been only successful only halfway, because sometimes there are outside vendors and some people tend to buy their food. But our campus canteens, now they have got rid of all the plastic lunch sheets, and that way we have avoided about 3,500 lunch sheets per day on campus, which is more than 1 million lunch sheets per year. So please be supportive of this. If you can bring your lunch box and water bottle from home, that is, of course, the COVID-19 has made things change now. Now I'm sure you all bring your water bottle or lunch from home if you come to the university. So anyway, such changes and making awareness and also having this waste storage center, all that has helped reduce our waste on campus. So actually I had sent one slide, maybe at the end we can see it, how campus waste, plastic waste and other waste types have got reduced over time. And so that's something good, and I hope you all will be thinking about this in the future, because then if we become mindful about our action, then we don't have to be bothered about achieving all these SDGs. If you are concerned about SDG number 12, sustainable or responsible consumption and production, naturally even the other SDGs will be taken care of, especially climate action. So if you talk about the climate action or SDG 13, so there you have to be concerned about combating climate change and its impact. So how can you do that? By reducing the emissions released to the environment, that is mitigation part, and also by taking action against impacts, that is adaptation. So to minimize the emissions from the university, as a university, we have already taken some action, like now even our emissions from electricity, actually we have calculated the carbon footprint of the university last year, and for the I'm from Faculty of Science, my students have been calculating that since 2014, and over time we find that emissions related to electricity has got reduced. That is mostly because of the shift to LED lamps and also inverter ACs and more energy saving appliances, and that's a good trend. And also now there are some I know that management faculty, they have about 37 kilowatt solar power possibility, generation possibility, and also there is this water recycling, water treatment, sewage water treatment plant there. And also now in the future, all the buildings are supposed to be smart buildings. That's a requirement. So that is good. So when you have buildings with good energy conservation, water conservation, including sensory helps, rainwater harvesting, rooftop gardening, and also something like we call it these creepers on walls, vertical gardens. So all these are good things for the buildings on campus. So in the future, that will be there. And that is what the trend has been. And also, so that we need to think about minimizing our emissions. So if you have a good vegetation cover around, trees around, then you don't need much AC. And also if your building walls can be covered by vertical gardens, then it will provide natural coolness to the inside. Then you might not need much cooling from the inside. So like that, there are so many things we can do on campus, and it has to be done at faculty level with the support of everyone, and I hope in the future we all can do that. And even the importance of vegetation is it not only absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but it provides cooling. And even if you can have a good grass cover, it will reduce the impact of these extreme events. And I know that some of you talked about the vulnerability of Sri Lanka to climate change. So in 2020, we were placed number 6, but in 2019 Global Climate Risk Index, we were placed number 2, because every year we have been experiencing torrential rainfall or droughts, so alternating droughts and floods. So we have to have adaptation measures for all these impacts. So it's good to have a good vegetation cover, so that even if you have a good grass cover, it can allow infiltration and reduce surface runoff. And because our campus is an urban campus, we cannot have too many trees there, but of course we can have nice permeable surfaces like grass and other even concrete surfaces. We can make it permeable like that. So there are things that are important to our environment, so that it will help us reduce our contribution to climate change, and actually then it will take care of this goal, climate action, and it has to come from you.
Professor Lokopitia, I think there will be a question and answer session. So I think we should move on to the next speaker.
Yes,
yes, thank you.
Okay. So yes. Okay. Did I take too much of time?
That's fine. All the information is really wonderful contribution towards the panel.
Thank you.
But let me just move on to the other speaker.
Thank you.
I think, thank you very much, Professor Lokopitia. Let me now cordially invite Dr. Shami Kuimanasinghe, once a member of the faculty and contributed immensely for the development of the environmental law curriculum in the Faculty of Law. As an advocate of right to development, Shami, what are your thoughts on the concept of right to development, current development and future prospectus? And also, I would particularly like for you to focus on challenges of the concept of right to development. Over to you, Shami.
Thank you, Kokila. And it's wonderful, some, I don't know, more than 20 years later, to be speaking to the faculty where I had my basic legal education and taught for more than 10 years, and also introduced environmental law. So that was way back in 1993 or 94. So maybe 25 years later, to have listened today to all those lovely presentations on the different 17 SDGs was very, very important to me, very meaningful. And I was very impressed by the level of how you all have thought about each SDG and how they can be applied, how they are being applied, what are the challenges, what are the issues specifically to Sri Lanka. So Ayubowan, Vanakkam, good morning, afternoon, evening. Also to my colleagues, thank you for the invitation, and thank you to my colleagues, Gaynell and Ben, for joining us today in spite of time differences and difficulties. So yes, at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, I work specifically on the right to development. And I would also like to touch a little bit on international cooperation, but the two of those, they go together. Because the right to development is premised on international cooperation and solidarity. So I think you're already a bit familiar with this, right? Kokila, if I understand correct, you already introduced the right to development to the students?
Yes, we had a basic discussion on that, madam. Yes.
Okay. So this declaration it comes out of long-term historical developments when today's developing countries or former colonized post-colonial states, when they got their independence in the beginning from the 1950s, 60s, after some years, many of them realized that although they had technically or officially got political independence, they did not always have economic or real sovereignty, economic independence in every sense of the word. And years later, with the globalization processes, one can question whether, that independence or economic independence, which sees a sort of a global production and consumption, a global economy, whether it really allows much independence to all countries. So the right to development comes out of that quest from going back to the 1960s, really. You can trace it back to a speech made in the General Assembly by the Foreign Minister of Senegal, who said developing or newly independent states need to fight for their independence in every sense of the word, and to fight for development. And development at the time, now this was a sort of a pre-environmental, I mean, if you look at environment and discourse in the modern sense in which we see it, and not really in the sense that Kokila, which I will come to later, the whole idea of sustainable development as part of our historical heritage and so on. But if you look at development, the way it has been conceived from the since the Industrial Revolution, and more so in the recent era of globalization, it is all about materialism, material consumption, economic development, counting development in terms of aggregates, economic aggregates, such as gross domestic product, per capita income, etc., and not really taking into account the human or the environmental or the other more holistic and multidimensional approaches, but rather looking only at the economic approaches. And then, of course, we know the history of sustainable development, starting going back to, say, Stockholm, where we had the environmental movement become more and more important in the international discourse. And in 1987, we had Gro Harlem Brundtland's World Commission on Environment and Development report, which said that sustainable development is development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think this is very relevant when we are talking to a university audience of young people. You are the future, and beyond you also the children of today and those yet unborn. So what does the right to development really mean? It means, according to the Declaration of 1986, which I hope you have all seen or will look at, it means the constant improvement of human well-being. Now, if you look at that definition, or the way that RTD is defined in the declaration, is not quite about economic development itself, but a much more human-centered, people-centered concept of development. Other very important principles of the right to development include participation. Now, I know that some of the presentations today mentioned the importance of participation. And the declaration talks about free, active, and meaningful participation. So who does development? It's not only the government. Of course, the government has a critical role to play, especially in developing countries where you have to do the policy planning and so on to meet the needs of people. We were told earlier that there is still hunger, malnutrition, and a lot of nutrition related issues also still in Sri Lanka. So central planning and the role of the state is very important. But also the role of people. Do the general public have a right to speak? Yes, when in my years of teaching environmental law, the first years in the 1990s, 2000s, we had so many interesting public interest litigation cases, including the famous Eppavala case, which showed the rights of the people, not only in terms of people themselves, but also the natural resources, the conservation of natural resources for present and future generations, intergenerational equity. And Kokila, I noticed that you asked me, so how do you see right to development in relation to environmental conservation and sustainable development? Actually, the right to development properly understood, I think, can really contribute to sustainable development. And that is borne out also in two articles of very important international instruments, which highlight, if you haven't looked at these articles, please look at them. Principle 3 of the Rio Declaration of 1992 and Article 11 of the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, which sets up the whole human rights system, including our office, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And these both say that the right to development must be at the heart of sustainable development. So I think the key is in how you understand development, because if, like many people think, the right to development is all about only economic development, then there is a conflict, there is a problem, because then how do we protect and preserve the environment, guard against climate change, protect the rights of the people? I noticed very interesting presentations, for example, on gender, and I would say also race, racial justice, gender justice, and all forms of justice are also important for the 2030 agenda, which looks at people, partnerships, planet, peace, and I've forgotten the other P, but it'll come. Anyway, the 5 Ps. So a very holistic and multidimensional process. And I think the right to development, although it predates the environmental, the sustainable development, the Paris Agreement, it predates all that. So of course, it doesn't go as far as all of those would in protecting the environment or in sustainable development. I think it has the tools, it has very important principles, including the principle of distribution, the principle of fair distribution of the benefits of development. If you look at what's happening now in the world, or what's been happening for decades now really, is the increase of inequalities, right? Inequalities at all levels, inequalities at the national level, inequalities at the international level. So that in paragraph 16, 35, 22 of the 2030 agenda, it stresses the fact that we haven't all developed equally. So we talk, the governing principle of the 2030 agenda is that of leave no one behind. We go forward, leaving no one behind. But we know that both within countries and among countries, this is not the case. Some of our countries, like our own, have been through years of civil conflict, ethnic conflict, warfare. And so I think for our countries, it is even more important to stress the human rights dimensions of development. one of our students said that we don't have a lot of emphasis on human rights. I think human rights has to be really go to the heart of everything, whether it be technology or development or peace and security issues. Human rights should be at the center, and the right to development is interesting in that it brings all of these things together. The three pillars of the United Nations is peace, human rights, and development. And all of these three meet in the right to development, which looks for peace and security, development, human rights, and non-discrimination, equality and non-discrimination, both at the national and international levels. I will then go a little bit to talk about international solidarity and international cooperation. None of you mentioned the ABC targets. Now, if you look at the 2030 agenda, you have the targets, the numerical targets, or maybe some did actually, and I missed it. 1, 2, 3 targets plus the ABC targets. And the ABC targets in each of those goals is also as important as the 1, 2, 3 targets, because they point to the means of implementation. And the means of implementation point to the importance of partnership at all levels, but also very importantly, international and global cooperation. The countries that are left behind according to, or have not made as much progress as others include, according to the 2030 agenda, African countries, right? Countries in Africa, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, small island developing states, and at some point it also mentions the particular challenges of countries in conflict and post-conflict. And I think, well, Sri Lanka, we know, is not a SID. It's not a small island developing state because it's bigger than a SID. But as spelled out by the professor who spoke before me, we are very high in the risks on climate change and environmental disasters. And well, we had the tsunami and we had many other, like you say, constant droughts and floods. So what do we do? Become more resilient. And I need to mention COVID-19. In the face of COVID-19, well, in a way, it has brought us all together. Probably we wouldn't have had this experience in the same way if not for COVID-19, but then the human cost, the cost to the economy have been magnanimous. And now the UN speaks in terms of not only leaving no one behind, because we know that the 2030 agenda well, realizing it has become much more difficult. It has gone backwards, very much backwards. It was anyway off track up to even before COVID-19 outbreak. It was already off track, but it has become more off track than ever now, together because of the COVID-19, which has set all countries, all people back, including the richest, most developed countries, right? So it's a time for solidarity. It's a time for building back better. We talk about building better, and this building better cannot be the new normal. We cannot go back to what it was in the past, where a small percentage of the people have the majority of the wealth. They say I think something like 8 people in the world, 8 billionaires, hold the same amount of wealth as the other half of humanity. This cannot go on. So we are talking now about building better, which means building fairer. Soon after the COVID-19 crisis, we also saw another crisis. After the killing of George Floyd in the USA, we saw the Black Lives Matter movement, and which led to a whole solidarity and cooperation movement around the world, because people could now see the injustices that have gone on for centuries. So we need to build fairer. We need to build more just and equitable societies, which is SDG 16, peaceful societies. But because societies will never be peaceful if you're discriminating, if you're unjust towards any part of that society, whether it's based on race or religion or ethnicity or anything, or whether international schemes also discriminate. If you look at international trade, international investment, international technology regimes, they haven't exactly been built on any measure of fairness. We know that global governance to date does not give all countries, although we say officially, theoretically, all countries are equal, the richest, the more powerful, the most industrialized countries have the greatest say in global governance, whether it be peace and security issues or development issues, or especially trade, monetary issues. And today, when we have a massive crisis in global debt issues, many countries, including middle-income countries like ours, are really overburdened and weighed under debt burdens. There has to be some relief. And this has to be based on building better, building fairer, building greener. For you students of environmental law, very important. Also building greener. Have I come to the end of my time or finished it? Or what?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
So come back at the question and answer session. Now
yes.
I think we should move on to the other speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Now, let me cordially invite our next speaker, Mr. Benjamin Shash panel, and express my sincere gratitude for accepting our invitation. Human rights and environmental protection have an intrinsic link in determining right to healthy environment in a society that ensures sustainable living. International environmental scholars and some jurisdictions set promising examples, such as New Zealand, India, and Bangladesh, to go even beyond the anthropocentric understanding of right to a healthy, clean environment to a biocentric approach to right to nature. So I would really like to have your thoughts on this, and please share your thoughts on right-based approach in understanding sustainable development goals. So please, over to you, Benjamin.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the students and all involved for organizing this and the presentations. It's been really interesting to hear more about the SDGs in the particular country context of Sri Lanka. So I work on and lead the small team at OHCHR working on environment and climate change at the UN office here in Geneva, and in that capacity work closely with Xiami, and want to thank her for the invitation to join this discussion as well. I think in the, I'll try to be brief so we can have a bit of time for question and answer. And unfortunately, I won't be able to stay much longer than 11:30 because I have another call. So that said, let me first respond to the question about right to nature. I think it's a really interesting evolving area or rights of nature rather, evolving area of law. And there's jurisprudence in a number of countries articulating rights of nature. One of the cases that comes to mind is a recent case in Colombia. And those cases reflect both evolving norms and law, but also I think perspectives of indigenous peoples and others that have often not been well reflected in traditional legal systems. And I think that's particularly important when we're talking about sustainable development, that those perspectives are reflected in the discussion. That said, our domain is human rights, and mine in particular is work related to the human right to a healthy environment. So that's where I'll focus. And this is also an evolving area of law, in the sense that even though there is what I would characterize as a normative consensus with more than 150 national governments recognizing the human right to a healthy environment in some way, shape, or form, there is as of yet no formal global recognition of the human right to a healthy environment. So, one aspect of our work is advocacy related to that issue. The High Commissioner for Human Rights came out and called explicitly for global recognition of the human right to a healthy environment. At this point, I guess it's a little over 2 years ago. That's the first time we had a High Commissioner calling for this change. The UNEP Executive Director has called for global recognition as well, and the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Environment has been instrumental in pushing that dialogue. So why does it matter, and what do the SDGs have to do with it? Well, I think for starters, the SDGs are a political framework which represent a set of objectives and really a vision for the future. And they bring together the environment, economic development, and human rights under one overarching structure. So that is quite useful. And if you go through the SDGs, every one of them has some link or relevance to the human right to a healthy environment. The three that are, I'd say, most directly linked are SDGs 13, 14, and 15, which relate to climate change, life below water, and life on land. But poverty, food security, health, the rights, to water and sanitation, sustainable consumption and production, all of these things, really. Education, under the CRC, you have a right to an education with respect for nature. So, it's not hard to draw linkages between the human right to a healthy environment and the SDGs, and that shouldn't be surprising because one of the primary objectives of the SDGs is sustainable development. As we all know, that includes environmental, social, and economic development. I just highlight, in this sense, also what the SDGs do not do. And they don't establish a legally binding framework. They don't go beyond 2030. And they don't mandate action per se. What they do is they create political pressure for action. They create a framework for mobilization of resources and an ongoing framework for discussion under voluntary national reviews and the high-level political forum and other fora related to these goals. But that's where I'd say the other thing that's important is looking at what legally binding treaties there are that relate to the Sustainable Development Goals. And so in that sense, under SDG 13 on climate change, you have a political objective stated, but the vehicle with teeth that will carry on past 2030 into the indefinite future is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And that's where, the more concrete action takes place with respect to advancing the global and national solutions to climate change. And where, interestingly enough, we also have in the Paris Agreement an explicit reference to human rights for the first time in an international environmental agreement. And, with respect to biodiversity, there's a negotiating process and a convention on biological diversity. And again, there you have another space where there's a discussion about rights-based approaches. And I think the key to rights-based approaches generally, and I'll probably wrap up with just a quick definition or explanation of why we think the right to a healthy environment is so key in this area, including global recognition of the right, is one, it brings together different key components which are essential for all life on this planet, including our own. So that's a safe and stable climate. That's a non-toxic environment. That's biodiversity and ecosystem integrity. And it's also the procedural elements that are needed to achieve the right to a healthy environment. So participation, access to information, and access to justice and environmental decision-making processes. And these link quite well with SDG goals on governance, and so SDG 16 on gender equality, et cetera. But they're also really the key to the rights-based approach, right? Ensuring an inclusive process, ensuring one where all people, and particularly persons, groups, and peoples in vulnerable situations who may have been historically or otherwise marginalized, are able to participate effectively, have their voices heard, and contribute to decision-making processes, and that they're able to do so in an informed way, having had, appropriate access to information, appropriate education, et cetera. So, again, you can see the linkages to the SDGs in pretty much every other word I'm saying. You can make a direct connection to one of the SDGs. And then, of course, that they have access to justice where their rights are affected. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. That was really interesting. And with your experience and knowledge on right to development as well as human rights approach to environmental protection was an interesting contribution. Thank you so much. And now I think for some communication or technical error, I think we are unable to connect with Gaynor. But we have Earthmates ready, I think. So I will straight away go to Earthmates, and we have Iranga from Earthmates organization. And this is also very interesting, interesting connection between the final year law students and passed out law students and other university students. This is an inter-university organization, Earthmates. So now I would like to invite Iranga to join us with her ideas and experience on youth participation in SDGs, implementing SDGs in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Iranga.
Thank you, Dr. Kokila. Okay, so good afternoon to everyone. So representing Earthmates Foundation, I'm Iranga Aditanaike, and I'm a co-founder and president of Earthmates Foundation. So today I hope to focus on the topic of the youth participation in achieving and promoting sustainable development goals, especially with reference to our organization Earthmates. So before moving to the topic, let me take a few seconds to thank Dr. Kokila Konasinghe and the entire organizing committee and all the collaborating teams for giving Earthmates this opportunity to represent the Sri Lankan youth at this discussion. So moving on to the topic, actually, we all know that today this sustainable development concept has become a crucial point in every field. So everyone has a shared responsibility in achieving and promoting sustainable development goals, especially along with this Agenda 2030. So even UN has stated that this youth, they are the torch bearers of this Agenda 2030 and also this sustainable development goals achieving process. So actually before having this Agenda 2030, we had this Agenda 21, like what was emerged from 1992 Rio Conference. So when we are referring to the section 3 of it, it clearly identifies this youth and the children as one of the major groups in achieving and promoting sustainable development goals. So as a youth organization committed to environmental conservation, so identifying this importance of the role of the youth and the importance of the SDGs, we have created an organizational platform for the youth, like to get engaged with the SDG promoting projects and to give their contribution and to go ahead with this global vision. And also like for now, in our organization, we have 200 plus volunteers, especially consist of graduates and undergraduates, and also we have like school leavers and also students from high school. So with this membership, we are launching our projects with a final target of achieving sustainable development goals. Therefore, like we believe that the Earthmates, we represent the Sri Lankan youth at this global vision. And also like as we are doing environmental related projects, mainly and directly we are focusing certain SDGs. For an example, we are focusing this climate action, then life on land, then life below water, and also clean water and sanitation, and also this sustainable cities and communities concepts, is this green building concept. And also when we are launching our projects, we are partnering with a lot of stakeholders. So we are like promoting this 17th Sustainable Development Goals, like that. So, but like some may think that we are only focusing these SDGs, not others. For that, like my point is, like in everything, like to activate this sustainable development goal, any sustainable development goal, first of all, we have to like ensure the right to life, because the most important part is the human. So without human beings, we can do nothing. So first of all, we have to ensure the right to life. So to ensure the right to life, we have to ensure the right to environment. So in ensuring right to environment, we are doing this environmental conservation project. So as an organization, what we are doing is that part. So we are doing environmental conservation projects while promoting sustainable development goals. So in our organization, actually, we mainly focus on raising awareness, especially launching this webinar series and also workshops and discussions. For now, like we have an ongoing project called Voice for Unborn. There we are discussing a lot of current environmental issues and also important environmental concepts. So, and also like apart from raising awareness, we are launching a lot of competitions and like to get aware about this sustainable development goals and to change the mindset of the community. But the thing is, like apart from this raising awareness, we have to like do physical projects actually. So that that is limited by this pandemic situation, because with this unexpected situation, we have a lot of limitations, we have a lot of hurdles. But I believe that like youth, they have a lot of innovative ideas, they have a lot of creative ideas, so they will overcome from all these hurdles and like they will achieve these sustainable development goals in their own ways. And also like at the end of the day, like I want to say that like over the next 10 years, maybe 20 years, this youth, they are no longer in the same age category. So they will become adults. So then they are the key drivers in achieving an implementation of sustainable development goals. So we invite Sri Lankan youth like to get engaged with any local or international platform to give your contribution to protect environment and like to give your contribution to promote and achieve sustainable development goals and to make this earth a better place for unborn. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Eranga. Wish you all the very best for all the future plans, and we look forward to joining with you again. Thank you. So now we are going to the question and answer session. I think since Benjamin has another meeting, I would take 2 questions are there for him. So I will take the first question it is from Rochelle. So this is for you, Benjamin. There is a question that we saw there were thousands of killings of minks in countries like Denmark in this pandemic, and we would like to know your views regarding balancing rights of nature and rights of humans during this pandemic context. Benjamin?
Thank you. And there was another similar question related to rights of nature and rights of humans from Lakshita.
Yes.
So I'll try to answer both in one go. First of all, I think that it's really important that we try to reconceptualize the relationship between people and our environment. And so I think it's a bit of a false dichotomy, rights of nature versus rights of people. I think in many ways they're one and the same, and we are part of nature, and we rely upon nature for our own survival. And so this is actually a big part of, we've recently finalized some key joint messages with UN Environment on human rights and biodiversity, for example. And this reconceptualization of the relationship between people and nature is an important part of that. In general, I would say, that a rights-based approach, and this is more responding to the question from Lakshita, a rights-based approach should include diverse human perspectives. And for many people, the environment has a unique cultural, spiritual, or religious significance. And so in some way you can sort of shoehorn in the rights of nature to a human rights-based approach by recognizing that to respect somebody's right to culture or right to religion, you actually do need to respect this idea that nature itself has or may have inherent rights. So I think that it's important we don't think of ourselves constantly as in opposition to nature. And that's a really important part of addressing this. Now, it's true that it's easy to fall into that framing in many circumstances because human action over the past, thousands of years has been immensely destructive to nature. But we aren't inherently required to act in that way. And that's part of what sustainability is really about, right? It's about changing the way we consume and produce and changing our relationship with nature. So, in terms of pandemic response and negative impacts on nature, we've seen negative impacts. We've also seen some positive impacts, which are unlikely to carry on as a result of reduced economic activity and travel. There's some slight reductions in pollution and greenhouse gas emissions and things in certain places. That is already sort of starting to go away. And frankly, that's where building greener and better is so important. The response needs to be, look, we've dealt with one crisis. We're not done, of course, and we've got a really, really long way to go on this one. But we need to be looking at these crises which are linked. Zoonosis, animal to human transmission of viruses, is often the result of environmental degradation. So this pandemic isn't something that came out of nowhere. It's not something that was unexpected by scientists and health professionals. And it's not something that, frankly, we've taken the right steps to prevent from something similar like it from happening again in the future. So I think the building greener and better is really critical to part of how we conceptualize you know, our relationship with nature, how we move forward in a more constructive and positive way. And unfortunately, we've seen some countries are rolling back environmental protections. We've seen exacerbation of existing inequalities. You know, it's really exposed what we already knew about healthcare systems in many places. And so this is a real challenge. And we need to respond to it, but we also need to recover better from it. And is that recovery that's really the critical point, I think, because we're good at responding to crises with a short-term, intense sort of, you know, response, mobilization of resources. But then we just carry out our regular day-to-day business and don't really change the things that led to the crisis, don't really address the long-term systemic issues. And if we keep doing that, I mean, we're already very far down the climate change path, you know, to the point that the Paris Agreement objective of 1.5 is maybe barely attainable if we took extreme actions, just from a practical standpoint. And 1.5 has huge human rights impacts. 1.5 degrees of climate change. I mean, the amount we've had already, which is maybe between 1 and 1.2 degrees, is displacing millions of people each year, right? We're in a crisis that we're not responding to. And it's an environmental one, which is climate, which is biodiversity loss, which is pollution. So if we reframe how we think about ourselves and nature, I think it can go a lot to helping us better and more effectively address these issues. And I'll stop there. I'm sorry, that was a rather long-winded response. Over to you.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you so much. And now I think there are 3 questions for Professor Lokopitia. I'll take that and then I'll come back to Shambi. Professor Lokopitia, there are 3 questions for you. One is whether there are any bylaws implemented by the University of Colombo administration with specific intention of implementing SDGs. I will combine the next question with that, and also Tanuki is asking what are the key challenges faced by the university administration in implementing SDGs. So if you can answer those 2 questions together, I think that will do.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Kokila. And so actually there are no bylaws specifically on SDGs. Actually, we have bylaws for our Center for Environmental Initiatives as well, with the aims and objectives to establish a proper solid waste management system for the university, to protect campus environment using environmentally friendly measures, create environmental awareness, having training sessions, workshops, and so on. So that is to promote green initiatives on campus and having green awards in the future. So like that, we have and to apply for green awards. So there are like objectives and aims like that, focusing on sustainability, but the terms bylaws, so SDGs is not there. And also we have on campus, there is a draft energy policy for our campus. And also we at CEI, we have developed an environmental management system for our university. We recently got the approval for that with an environmental policy in it, and it targets sustainability overall. And also there is a newer development to have a SDG platform for the campus through that is going to operate through the international office, and CEI also has been invited to be a part of it. So like that, there are certain regulations on campus like that, but not bylaws on SDGs per se. And challenges, actually, I hope I will take one example in explaining this. In 2017, when we made the university a polythene-free zone, all the canteen staff, they were very supportive. They right away got rid of all the lunch sheets and everything. But then we regularly had meetings with them. then they were saying, Madam, how can we do that? Because there are people who come from outside and eat in the canteen. They bring their parcels from outside and use the lunch sheets there and simply dump it in the waste bin. So it has been hard because of those people who don't listen to who don't have these environmental concerns, because you cannot inculcate those things in someone. I mean, you cannot do that by force. It has to come from within yourself. You know, even the canteen staff, everybody, people were very supportive. But when there are outside vendors who sell lunch packets in polythene lunch sheets, and when our students buy those and bring it inside, I mean, we cannot be like the police. You know, it's a liberal place. Campus is a place where people have more liberty. So it has to. But over time, we have been able to reduce our polythene waste on campus by 50% compared to 2017. So it has been on the decreasing trend, which is something very good, I think. So the challenge is these people's attitudes. You know, it's hard to change people's attitudes. We have had so many awareness sessions, even at the when you have the orientation programs. We have been talking to the students in the faculties, bring your own lunch box, water bottle, because that will be good for the environment, you know. So I mean, we have put awareness boards everywhere. At CEI, you know, it's mostly myself and there is an environmental officer, but we have done so many things, but it has to come from community support is needed for proper implementation, you know. Yeah.
Your contribution, I think, is visible all over the university in terms of protecting the environment of the university premises. So we really appreciate that effort. And just only perhaps a quick response to this question by Divya. Is there any program on how to manage the enormous surgical waste during the pandemic?
Actually, that's a really good question. And on campus, there is no way we can do that. Even CMC has no solution for that. So what we have advised people or the campus communities, don't dispose of your, don't dump your masks on campus. Please take those home. You know, so when you take it home, then you have to find your own solution, because in Sri Lanka, I don't think anywhere there is a solution. Even at medical faculty, they are using more masks and gloves and so on, but I don't think even they have a solution. So people simply take those home. So I mean, even if you, I really don't know, there is no proper solution for that. Even I have been collecting used ones. I have simply washed them with soap and I have put it in a cloth bag, and then I'm keeping it. Someday if there is a solution comes, ideally these should be incinerated. No, something has to be done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now I think I will move on to Dr. Shami's questions. There are a couple of questions for you, Shami. This is a very interesting question. I think I have noticed in your research also you have dealt with this area. This question is by Tanuki. Do you think that the core right to development has by now become synonymous with the right to sustainable development? Or are these two phrases mutually exclusive in terms of its meaning? If they aren't, which way would they differ?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Tanuki. They are definitely not mutually exclusive. I would say they are very closely connected concepts. Definitely not mutually exclusive, because right to development already has the basic contents of sustainable development. It has to be development that, I mean, like before, economic development is important. Certainly, we still have to work within the economic development frame, but it cannot be enough. It has to be moved. The decisions for economic development should be moved ahead by the need for improvement of human well-being. Now, as I said, in 1986, we had not yet come to that full environmental consciousness, right? That followed a few years later with 1992, 1993 and beyond. So therefore, on a strict reading of the Declaration on the Right to Development, you could infer that it's not really environmental, it's not really sustainable. But sustainability also has now, like we have seen in the 2030 agenda, whereas it started with two main dimensions, no? Reconciling environment and development was the original idea, but now it is three-dimensional or multidimensional. It is environment, development, and human being, humanity, right? So given the way that over the years, the concept of sustainable development itself has advanced, and the 2030 agenda then captures all those advancements by then talking about the 5 Ps and including the importance of partnership and international cooperation, solidarity, all that. I would say they are complementary. They are, if you ask me what are the differences, I would say, strictly speaking, the right to development, if you take a more strict approach on it, does not, I mean, we know that it expressly does not include the environment, but by interpretation, by evolution, I would say now, like you posed the question, does it mean right to sustainable development? Perhaps yes. I won't say a complete yes, because there are still many people who argue that right to development is more about development and human rights and peace, and who would not bring the environmental dimension. But for me personally, it's also a lot a matter of interpretation. And like Kokila said in my writings, I have taken it to, we cannot do today the global situation, the situation of the planet is such that we cannot do development that is not sustainable. So we have to look for renewable energy. We have to go, and especially for developing countries, it's so important that, I mean, technology, like a lot of the differential, the development differential between developed and developing countries is in technology. That I know that one of our students presented also on SDGs 8 and 9 on industrialization. We are still not industrialized, but we cannot afford to industrialize the way the industrial world did. So we need renewable energy, we need sustainable or environmentally friendly technology. And we have done some recent studies on these issues and and I looked at them through the framing of the right to development, because whatever we achieve has to be like human rights consonant, meaning looking at the benefit to all. Human rights is for all people everywhere. The 2030 agenda is for all people and all countries. So we have to focus especially on the least advantaged. So the poor, the economically poor, the vulnerable, the marginalized. And in that sense, the RTD, or the right to development, has a lot to offer to the sustainable development implementation, especially the international cooperation and solidarity, because we are not going to achieve sustainable development, especially in poor countries and the poorest countries, like the least developed countries and the small island developing states, without a major amount of help, or at least solidarity. So help meaning international assistance, aid, but solidarity meaning let it be fair, let trade be fair, let investment not just plunder all the resources of poor countries and take all the benefits to the rich countries. Let there be fair sharing of the benefits of development. And debt relief. Many countries are today grappling with the problems of this. So all this, for me, all of this is interconnected. It's like all human rights, they say, are indivisible, interconnected, interdependent. You have civil and political rights, you have economic, social, cultural rights, you have the rights of the third generation rights, which include environment, development, and so on. And like that, all the SDGs are interdependent. We cannot achieve one of them without the other. And SDG 17 is critical to achieving all the SDGs. And then right to develop, see, that SDG framework is a policy framework. It's not law. 2030 agenda is a development policy framework. So what is the law that is underlying it? Many laws, but human rights law, including the right to development, is very important to operationalize, to make it real, to make it practical. Thank you. And there was another question for me, right?
Could you quickly respond to that, the gender aspect of sustainable development?
Yes. Of right to development, I think was the question. The gender aspect of RTD, no? So Article 8 says that women must play an active role in development. So that is the one reference directly to women in the RTD declaration, but we know that 2030 agenda has much more. We have goal 5 on gender equality, women's empowerment, etc. Also, the right to development has non-discrimination provisions, so non-discrimination on any grounds, which includes non-discrimination against women. So clearly, on the one hand, both the right to development and sustainable development push an equal role for women, an important role for women. And on the other hand, no discrimination. We have to reduce inequalities. As you say, SDG 10 is on inequalities within and between countries. And in inequalities within countries, we know that gender is a very high factor of discrimination, and that has to be redressed by all means.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that with that we come to the conclusion of the session, and I take this opportunity to especially thank Shami. And one final question, Shami, how do you maintain your youthful look? You look still the same.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. I guess students can kind of guess my age when I say I introduced environmental law 25 years ago. I myself felt, my goodness, that means I'm growing very old. How do I maintain it? I don't know. I mean, in this part of the world, we are always told that people of color like us do not show age, like Black and brown people do not show age. So that's one of the advantages maybe of being like us.
Yeah, blessed with that.
Yes.
So that's a good compliment. Okay, thank you so much, Shami, for making this connection and making this happen. We would really like to have you in the future for our other environmental law students in the future as well. So please keep in touch and stay blessed. Thank you so much. Over to you, Tiloka. I think its next item is the vote of thanks. If Arati is ready, then we can have Arati. Arati, over to you.
Thank you, Madam. It's about collaborating and putting the skills from different sectors together to find solutions that can create a more sustainable society. Very good evening to all. On behalf of the organizing committee, I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this webinar, Sustainable Development Goals. First and foremost, I thank Department of Public and International Law of Faculty of Law, United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Center for Environmental Law and Policy, Center for Environmental Initiatives, and Earthmates Organization for organizing this webinar on Sustainable Development Goals and for making sure this becomes a fascinating one. And I'm grateful to thank our esteemed panel of experts, including Professor Eranthathi Lokupitiya, Dr. Shyami Puvimanasinghe, Mr. Benjamin Skatcher, and Mr. Gaynor Curry, for despite their busy schedule, they have found time to grace this event. And I'm really happy, and it's my pleasure to thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor Chandrika Vijayaratne, Dean Madam Indra Nanayekara, Head of Public and International Law Department, Madam Vasantha Senaviratne, Senior Lecturer Dr. Kokila Konasinghe, and our Madam Pavitra Rajendran for their valuable guidance and their encouragement throughout all our efforts. And my heartfelt thanks to the representatives from Earthmates organization and the final year students representing all three mediums for your works and your findings you shared with us today. And thank you so much, my dear friends, participants, and all the invitees present here today. And once again, thank you for your attention. Thank you.